Here's a question I was just thinking about. Do you think
We don't.
Do you think the sexual revolution really spawned this?
Like
this
the
issue?
hippie thing?
Just
Free
like
love?
Feminism.
the feminist,
feminist.
sexual revolution. Because I was thinking like maybe it's almost an inevitable series of events. Because I feel like that really just made
I think
it
you're onto
completely
something, Mike.
took the procreation part out of sex. Now it's just have fun, free love,
Exactly.
use birth control, abortion, do whatever you need to do to keep kids out of it. And so now sex is no longer tied to procreation.
Exactly. There's a
Which
chain
then-
of consequences.
Which then makes it like, well, gender's kind of irrelevant now because it's really sex is relevant to really having kids, and it's just a dopamine hit.
yeah.
And so where's that?
I
Eventually,
think
The
what
sacredness
the
of marriage,
ultimate-
the sacredness, like sacred.
Well,
like
why
the
do you have
sacred,
that? Because
sacredness is so special, and
I want to say
hope-
something real quick before you get to sacredness, like just from a secular worldview, like a scientist secular worldview. The predominant dominance hierarchy is the male and the female sexual dominance hierarchy. That is what it is.
It's a template.
And it's because we have to have kids. That's the idea there. So if you get rid of that dominance hierarchy, then you have a vacuum. So what else takes on
Absurdities.
what takes on the next dominance hierarchy, right? Where's the control? Because if that is what people are controlled by, sex is. And I had this idea back in California. I was like, because I saw this coming. I was like, I saw a future where there were no sexes. Because what happens when you do? It's like the Brave New World thing, right? It's like you don't have.
They
to
had
have sex.
sexes there.
They had sexes, but it was only for pleasure. No one had babies. It was all eugenics. It was all test tubes, and they did not have to make babies. They were young and beautiful up until they were 60 years old, and then they dropped dead, right? So they could have sex as much as they want with as many
Again,
different
that's
partners.
taking the sacredness out of old age and the gray hair and all of the symbolism involved with a person growing to his completion.
They had bad days, really bad days. They would go through like deep depressions, and what would they do? They'd pop a soma. They'd take a soma holiday where they could get away from everything and go on this blasted adventure where they would come back.
it's a drug. Yeah,
It was a drug, right? So you get to this like hedonistic place to where people are just controlled. And what is the ultimate course of action? Like in the Brave New World, they didn't want any wars, right? They were like, no more wars, no more dysfunction,
No more
no
sadness.
more arguments,
But
no
the problem
more
is,
savages.
you took physical war and
no
you
more
traded
pain,
it for
no more
metaphysical
suffering.
war. You got the and this is why the sacred is what binds up their physical to the metaphysical. The sacred cannot. It's largely dead. No one knows what you mean with sacred. When people think of sacred, they're like, oh, sage and like little Eastern like philosophy, and it's like, no, sacred.
Crystals.
What sacred is it's a definition of the fact that humans are not just a carnal representation of themselves. That there is another eternal vestige of the human person that is eternal and spiritual, and the sacred informs that because we all die. And there's no person who's been alive so the sacred is our encoding. It's something that we have to encode into our kids, into ourselves, so that the species as it continues to grow is informed by the sacred, the immovable, the stuff like archetypes. These are things that won't go away. It doesn't matter how much you progress. There is a structure to us that's natural that you cannot alienate. And if you alienate it, you run the risk of absurdity and self-destruction, right? It's suicide. From a metaphysical point.
Well, if
so
you think about it, not even
sacredness,
metaphysically,
so
if no one's
sacredness,
having
but look
babies,
at the
they can't have
sacredness. But look,
babies.
the
Literally is
sacredness that's
suicide.
happening in marriage, right? Because this is a good point that Mike brought up. Because the sexual revolution, its seeds were like in Aldous Huxley's book to turn sex into a dopamine hit, instead of, and that's where the sacredness dropped off of sex, right? Sacredness was you're having kids.
Microphone.
You're having kids. This is legacy for your species.
It literally had like guardrails up. Like if like your dominance hierarchy is based on sex in the end, but you had the consequence or the guardrails of like this action creates children, and so it has meaning to it. It requires some sort of filter,
Yeah.
and then you remove all those guardrails, and now what?
Yeah, it's like you just have caterpillars.
Well, you could
There's
say
no
that-
butterflies. It's like, well, we just have a bunch of caterpillars. You like
Any-
caterpillar stage better than butterfly. No one gets to see the beauty of the sacred. The sacred is always saying there's beauty out here that you can enjoy and have as a species, as a people, as a culture that you have to work towards. You're going to be a caterpillar the rest of your life. You're going to be in the cocoon. You come back out of the cocoon, you're still a caterpillar. There's no sacred progression. The sacred words are marriage, grace, forgiveness. These are all words that are our sacred nomenclature from the Bible that informs us of what they are, so we can encode that in our kids and have that encoded in us and influence society for the better. Or we can have secular versions of those words which have stripped down all of the sacred, and then we have nothing. Well, just call it sex. You have a relationship, it's just sex, right? It's just sex. What is it really? It's a sacred bond between man and woman to co-create with God your spiritual family.